Hello, my name is Michael Savoldi. Uh, I've been involved in the horse industry for a very long time. I was a farrier science instructor and a farrier for many years. And I'd like to talk a little bit about balance as it applies to the hoof capsule, especially medial lateral balance of the hoof capsule and distal phalanx. So there's many terms for the word balance or definitions for the word balance. It's really hard to pick one for the hoof capsule because there's so many. So I just put these two out here. um, an even distribution of weight, enabling someone or something to remain upright and steady. And since we're concentrating now on balance for the hoof capsule, I think this will fit quite well. And then keep or put something in a steady position so that it does not fall. And again, I think this relates to the hoof capsule. Trimming fundamentals. Okay, whenever a farrier trims a foot, he has to deal with these 6 items. And they would be 3 axes and 3 planes involved in trimming a foot. Our axes will be the X, Y, and Z, and our planes will be referred to as yaw, pitch, and roll. Now, I think yaw, pitch, and roll will fit this discussion quite well. They are nautical terms or aviation terms, well used in many industries, especially in the robotic industry. So I will try to explain these 3 because they are very important to understanding our trimming techniques. So what is an axis? It's a straight line in which the body rotates around. So I have a rod here that I can call our straight line, and I have a P3 bone, which I will use to represent the body. So I can put this bone on a vertical axis, and we will call this the y-axis. And so the only way this body rotates around this axis is this way. And we will refer to this as yaw. The next axis we will call the z-axis, and that will represent pitch. This is a vertical axis, and so pitch would be something like forward pitch or backward pitch. Some people could refer to the P3 bone as a positive palmar angle or a negative palmar angle. We'll be talking primarily about the hoof capsule, and I really like to use these terms when it comes to how a foot is trimmed or how a horse is standing on its foot. But in reality, a positive palmar angle would be a forward pitch, and a negative palmar angle would be a backward pitch. Remember that pathology can be based on the plane of the P3 bone. So any direction that I put this foot in a forward pitch, the plane is in a positive palmar angle, and we could expect to see pathology in the toe area. If we put the foot in a backward pitch, by trimming a hoof capsule, that could move this into a backward pitch. And then, I should explain that a little bit better, but just an uneven trim, an unbalanced capsule. Then we would see pathology based on the plane of the bone, pretty much in the heel area or the caudal portion of the foot. Our next axis we'll call the x-axis, and that will represent roll. It's again a vertical axis. And how does the body rotate around this axis? As it rotates like this, it will roll. So if I look at this bone, this bone could fall into a lateral roll or a medial roll, depending on how the capsule has been trimmed, medial-laterally. So let's talk about some 2 very important issues with the foot that everyone should understand thoroughly, because it'll be a great aid in reading radiographs and things like that. And that's the plane of the hoof capsule and the plane of the third phalanx. So the plane of the hoof capsule is set by the trim or natural wear. So keep that in mind, because horses cannot control how their feet wear. I've heard many times people say the foot should be trimmed the way it wears. Well, that can place the foot in a yaw pitcher roll. That can alter the plane of the P3 bone. And now we can develop pathologies based on the plane of the P3 bone. So that's really a misnomer. The plane of the third phalanx is set by the sole arch combined with the trim. So just remember that the arch has a great deal to do with the plane of the P3 bone. If it has a deep heel arch with a flat toe arch, I'm probably getting a little ahead of myself here. But this would be the arch. This is a very young horse, and it's a dried out. The sole's dried quite a bit. But here's what we mean by the arch internally here. So this can be high in the toe like this one, or it can be flat in the toe like this one. Both of those will affect the plane of the P3 bone, and yet both capsules have been trimmed to the sole plane. So that's why it's important to be able to recognize the differences between these two. The capsule plane versus sole plane. So if we look at this foot, the excessive sole has been cleaned out to the hard epidermal sole. So now we can identify different parts of this foot. If we were to put a level across the top of the foot, we can see how the horse is standing on his foot. But what plane is it in? Well, let's look at the sole plane. There's our sole plane. The sole plane represents the plane of the P3 bone medial laterally. So on this particular foot, the way it naturally wore, or maybe how it was trimmed, it would have unequal wall length beyond the sole plane. And so what are we looking at? How is this animal standing on its foot? It's the capsules in a medial roll. Now there are a lot of different trimming techniques, but I haven't really heard someone talk about the trimming technique that they use and then explain how the horse is standing on its foot based on that technique. And that's something that should be well understood, is how is the horse standing on its foot? Note, the sole plane is not in balance with the capsule. Capsule trimmed to the sole plane. And so now we can see that the sole and the wall are on the same plane. Foot trimmed to the ground surface. So now we know how this horse is standing on the ground. This foot has been trimmed to the sole plane. There's no length of wall beyond the sole plane. So it is horizontally plane to the ground surface, both anterior posteriorly or medial laterally. So that's a very sound position for the foot to be standing on, for the horse to be standing on, because everything's in balance with the horizon. So that would represent capsule balance. Note the sole plane and the hoof capsule are in balance with the horizon. Now, I've been talking a lot about all these different yawls and axes and things like that. But let's verify what we're saying, because I'm talking about a horizontally planed hoof capsule. Well, so we can verify this, because there's some very unique things about anatomy. So I'm going to take this foot. It says it's been trimmed to the sole plane, and I'm going to remove the distal border of the hoof wall. There's the sole plane. It verifies the capsule plane. So if we were to look at the sole, this area here is where the edge of the sole, right along here, the leading edge of the sole. You notice how even on this young horse it's very uniform? Well, that's where the sole interfaces with the hoof wall and the white line. So you would have the sole, white line, and hoof wall. So what's unique about this is that it's usually, once you go to the hard epidermal sole, you've established, that's called the sole plane. It's like skin covering our body. So, and it's unique because it's generally very uniform. Note that the red that you see in this foot that runs right along this area, that's the distal border of the sensitive lamina. And it's level. Where sensitive lamina ends, the sole begins. And we have a nice level area through here at the distal border of the sensitive lamina. We have uniformity in our vertical depth of our sole. And so our capsule is on a horizontally planed position with the ground. So it is in balance with the ground surface. Horizontally planed of capsule and P3 bone. Well, let's see the P3 bone. Let's see how that fits into our program, because that's included in our discussion. So what I'm going to do is remove the capsule so we can evaluate the plane of the P3 bone, the distal phalanx. And there we have it. The P3 bone appears to be on the same plane as the sole plane, medial laterally. I have to emphasize that because from toe to heel, it can anterior to posterior, dorsal palmar, however they want to call it. It's rare to find the P3 bone on a horizontal plane inside the capsule. It's common in hind feet because of stance, but it's in front feet. They're usually it's very common for a front foot to be in a positive palmar angle. That's extremely common. There's studies have been done on that. I think that says that from a 2 to don't quote me on this one, but a 2 to a 6 or 2 to 8 palmar angle. They say that's the way it should be. That's how it was. How that was what the study showed. That's what they found in the study. So it's common, but that's not the way it should be. So until our industry starts studying the pathologies to bone, because this bone shows pathology in the toe area, and it's been trimmed to the sole, and it was in a positive palmar angle. So once we start this bone is very important to our horse's body. And once we start studying the pathologies to this bone, you will see a change in our common thought when it comes to how to shoe a horse. But that's down the road. So let's, what happens if we were to alter the plane of this capsule? What will that do to the plane of the P3 bone? Well, if you look closely at the foot on the left, I'm going to raise one side. So look closely, and here we go. I just put the foot in a medial roll. How did I do that? I added length of wall. The dark area down here, this dark area right here actually represents length of wall. So I've rolled the capsule. Look at the foot up above. That's the same foot, trimmed to the sole plane. Let's look at the hairline. Here's the hairline that runs through this foot, and if you notice, it's lower on the lateral side than it is on the medial side. So symmetrical shoeing. There's a lot of people involved in that think a foot should be symmetrical, trimmed and shaped and made look really pretty symmetrically. But that doesn't have a thing to do with the internal structures of the foot, because we've just lifted that foot up, we've rolled the capsule. So let's see what it does to the P3 bone. It put the P3 bone in a medial roll. Again, we'll go back to my favorite saying, pathology can be based on the plane of the P3 bone. So if I can, one of these bones here was showing pathology. Probably don't have one. But anyway, so the capsule no longer is in balance with the horizon. Neither is the P3 bone on a medial lateral plane in balance with the horizon. What's that do for your collateral ligaments? It's going to stress them and other tissues within the foot. See, once you trim a foot to the sole plane and you get it established, tissue does not adapt immediately. It takes time for tissue to adjust to the trim. If you're a horse owner and you change farriers, and that farrier does not trim identical to the previous farrier, then he's altered tissue in his trim. He's changing the tissue. I don't think horses should be ridden the same day they're shod. They should be hand walked for a couple of days so tissue can adapt and then ride them. It's like a sprained ankle. Well, not like a sprained ankle, but similar to what I'm trying to say is it needs time to adjust to the tissue needs time to adjust for when it's healing. That probably wasn't a very good analogy, but we'll stay with it. So the capsule and P3 may not be on the same plane. So here we have our same foot trimmed to a horizontal plane, and we'll look at the radiograph of the foot in our imagination, and we can see that the P3 bone is on the same plane as the capsule. What happens if you have a capsule that's been trimmed to the sole plane and the P3 bone is in a rolled position? This one happens to show a medial roll to the P3 bone. But why is that? Well, let's see if we can explain some of the mechanics that take place. Remember that the body weight descends down the skeleton, and so the P3 bone is subject to body weight. And if the sole can't manage the body weight, the arch in the sole cannot hold up to that body weight, then it will fail, and that will put the bone in a roll position. So adjusting the plane of the distal phalanx with an orthotic. Let's see, I would like to, if I can, explain this. Okay. I've been working with orthotics for many years. I'll give you a little history about that. One day I was invited to do a lecture for the AFA convention in Lexington, and I was sitting in the Ontario airport, and there was a fella looking over my shoulder because I was reviewing my lecture on my laptop, and there was a fellow looking over my shoulder, and he interrupted, and he asked me, "What is that?" And I explained to him what I do and that I was going to give a lecture. And in our discussion, I just happened to say to him that, horses really need an orthotic. So he got excited. I just got excited too. You see my eyes go up. But anyway, he gave me his card and he wrote a fella's name on the back. He says, I work for a company that might be able to help you out. And gave me his card with a fella's name written on the back of it. So when I got back from the convention, I went right to that company. It was close to the campus. And I introduced myself, and I met a vice president. I think he was vice president in charge of marketing. And I explained what I wanted to do, and he got excited and took me in the back room, and he gave me these 2 jugs of liquid silicone. He said it's important that these are a 50-50 mix, and that's very important. So I went back to the school and got some measuring cups, a bunch of them, and we poured equal amounts and stirred them up. And the mixing is quite important with this silicone. What I actually was using, which is today now called pour-in, is simply a liquid silicone. It's the same stuff that the putty is made out of, but in a liquid form. And it has a mixing tube on the end. And that mixing tube is designed to give the proper amount of mix for that product. So if you're cutting the tube short, you're cheating the mix. Well, when you're mixing by hand, we didn't have that at that time. So by mixing by hand, I could overmix it and it would be setting up too fast and things like that. But we worked it out. But shortly after I started using it on the school horses, I noticed that it was a game changer for horses. An orthotic does so much to help a horse. It's unbelievable. But you have to know how to use it. You have to have a good understanding of what's moving internally before you use it. Another thing is silicone. Before I got onto the silicone putty, we used to go to a hardware store. I started off using pine tar and oakum. Well, that didn't really work very well. So we started using silicone from the hardware store. And that was awful it just affected the sole itself. It would just be all mushy and soggy and everything else. So one thing to remember about 2-stage silicone putty is it's breathable. Anything that glues to a horse's foot is non-breathable, so you probably may have adverse effects on the sole body if you use something that's gluable. Another thing to remember, that you don't want to put anything hard in the bottom of a horse's foot. You see, when the foot lands on the ground, the bone doesn't stop immediately. The bone keeps moving until it bottoms out on the top of the sole, and then it recoils. So if you stop that bone from stopping, that movement of the bone, the slow movement of the bone, cuts down on a lot of the reaction that takes place between the bone and the top of the sole, the vibrations. It's a collision point. So if you stop that sole from moving with a hard product, you're increasing the stress internally on the P3 bone and the sole dermis, along with the top of the sole. So you want that to come to a slow stop. So steel is measured in a Rockwell measurement. Plastics are measured in, I hate when my brain just turns on. Anyway, it'll come back to me. But it's a different measurement. You can get different strengths to your silicone putty. Anything over, durometer is the word I was looking for. Anything 60 durometer or greater, the silicone putty will break. It's hard, it gets hard. So it will break or crack and things like that. So it's a little too hard to be using for an orthotic. 55 durometer would be a stronger durometer, maybe if you're trying to control some movements inside the foot. 33 durometer makes for a good cushion. And you can get the silicone putty in these durometers. So keep that in mind, that you want something that will yield to the load. Your orthotic should yield to the load and then recoil. There's a lot to be said about putting something in the bottom of the foot, because you can cause a lot of damage. This needs to be in a controlled environment. Hopefully our podiatry veterinarians will start looking more into orthotics. Like I say, it's a game changer. I've had an awful lot of experience with it. Cuts down on tearing of the white line. The list goes on, and that's not our lecture. I just wanted to bring I'm introducing orthotics in this lecture. So adjusting the plane of the distal phalanx P3 with an orthotic. Takes me a while to get this figured out. But first, let's talk a little bit about the P3 bone. The third phalanx is especially important. This bone is an arch structure, and there are 3 arches involved with this bone. Your primary transverse arch runs across the foot of the toe of the bone in this area. This is a very important area for the horse. It maintains stability for the balance for the horse's foot. If I can't talk about how important this arch is, the transverse arch on the P3 bone is. And then we have 2 other arches. We have the medial longitudinal arch and the lateral longitudinal arch. The reason I'm talking about this at this moment is the sole. Remember that the bone is pressing down on the sole. So it's possible for the sole to take on the shape of the bone. This is a very narrow foot with a very deep arch into the bone. When bones age, when a horse ages, this edge demineralizes and it goes away. So over time, the bone can get shorter and shorter in its vertical depth. The sense of lamina will shorten, everything shortens, all due to the loss to the bone. So we need to protect this bone as best we can and protect the leading edge of the bone from demineralizing. An orthotic will hold the bone in an elevated position. But right now I just wanted to talk a little bit about how the hoof capsule can change rapidly. That can change the arch, and that then puts pressure on the bone, and bone can model to the pressure. Well, it's symmetrics because the P3 bone The sole can model to the bottom of the P3 bone simply by looking at this bone and this bone, who have two different arches. This is a deep arch, so most likely you would have a deep sole body in this foot. This is a flatter arch, so that would be a flatter sole. Now, when we're trying to reconstruct feet with an orthotic, you may put an orthotic in a flat, wide foot, and over time you will see that the capsule walls come in, everything starts getting really tidied up quite a bit. It's looking like a pretty good foot. It's not spread out and flat looking. But you might find when you take that orthotic out, within 3 days the foot is flat again. Well, that's because you're dealing with a horse that has a flatter arch to its surface, to the bone. It may have just demineralized so much that it's flat. So it's reshaping the arch due to body weight pressing the bone onto the sole. So in that case, the orthotic will be a permanent Band-Aid. As long as you want to keep a good functioning foot working, you have to use the orthotic. Once you take it out, it may go right back to what you had. Sometimes you can put an orthotic in a foot, and when after a period of time, the foot has all corrected itself, looking really good, and you take it out and it lasts, well, they're probably not riding the horse, one thing, but if it lasts, then the bone hasn't demineralized so much. You have more arch to your bone. So keep that. So let's just concentrate on things like that. That's why it's extremely important to know and understand your orthotic before you use it. I'm watching people now just jamming it in a foot and going home. There's a lot of tissue inside that foot that can be greatly affected. An orthotic can affect the attitude of a horse's mind. If it's hurting, if it's not hurting, it can affect gait, it can affect pastern alignment. There's so much, and there's so many positives with an orthotic, but it should not be used in the hands of an amateur. I'm stressing this for the horse, not for your benefit, but for the horse's benefit. So there's also, we said that there's that primary longitudinal or transverse, where you also have angles under your palmar process on here and here on your lateral and medial longitudinal arch on your bone. So now we can look at the sole body. The sole is an arch structure. There are 4 arches in the sole. The primary transverse arch, it runs across the toe of the hoof. That would be coming right through this area here. And then we have a medial lateral heel arch. That's the heel arch would be back in this area. Actually, the heel arch is more, when we talk, like this foot, if you can see it, has a collapsed heel arch. You notice, maybe I'll be able to show this to you later on, but this bone is in a roll and in a backward pitch, and it's loading into this area, and the heel arch is collapsing right in this area here. So when you're evaluating a heel arch, you want to just you have to look internally. You can't really see this. This shows a little bit, but primarily you have to see it internally with the radiograph or other imaging tools. So, but this can be prevented if we start horses early. At the university, they didn't put body weight on horses until the physis plates closed. On Arabian, they closed around 3 years old. Once they radiographed that they were sealed, then the trainers could put body weight, and that's when I put orthotics in them. I'm going to veer off for 1 minute here and talk a little bit about horses, transporting horses. Whenever we shipped horses, if they didn't have an orthotic, I would tape one in. That way, if they had a little shipping fever or something and the foot warmed up and wanted to break down, I had my bases covered. The horses were always trimmed to the sole plane before they were shipped, and they had an orthotic. If our brood mares were ready to have a baby, I would go in a week earlier and trim them to the sole plane and put an orthotic. I was just protecting them. If they should have a bout with laminitis, it would be minimal damage to their feet. I think racetracks, horses running a race, whenever you're using a horse where the foot at the end of the use is very warm, it would probably benefit with a little pack orthotic taped in that foot until the temperature was gone. You would save a lot of horses and have a lot less damage if it went to what do you call it, laminitic situation. But we have like I say, a transverse arch. The toe is so important for the horse. One is it has a lot to do with balance. Two, the toe has a lot to do with push off. So when that toe arch goes flat, things change in the whole horse, in the whole body. So it's important that we protect the toe arch. And then we have a medial and lateral heel arch. We just discussed the heel arch, how to recognize failure in the heel arch area. And then we have a longitudinal, medial longitudinal arch. See, maybe I'm there's your heel arch, and here's your medial lateral arches. So you can have failure in all of these. Let's look at this sole body. Let's look at this sole body right here. This is a very young horse, but it's already collapsing. This horse, I think, was around 3 months, but it's already collapsing in the heel arch here on, I should say, on the lateral arch, lateral longitudinal arch. It's collapsing through here. The heel arch is collapsing on the medial. Yes, on the medial heel arch is collapsing. What else? Even look at the midsection is collapsing. The arch in the toe arch is collapsing. And this horse is only 3 months. Now, this can change over time. Maybe a year later, this would be altogether different type of arch. But that's how important it is for us to protect bone, is we have to protect the arch. We want to do this all before the trouble starts. So now we can talk medial lateral arches. So looking at this cartoon drawing, we have a P3 bone put in around a drawing, where the drawing's been placed around the cartoon. So some of the things to look for when an arch starts to collapse. So on this foot, we see equal depth to our commissures, and the angle of our sole are equal. And so we have a horizontally planed hoof capsule with a horizontally planed P3 bone. Now we have a bone that's in a lateral roll. The commissure is not as deep. The commissure is not as deep on this side as it is on this side, and we have a flatter angle on this side than this side. So the flatter angle, when these angles change, the foot will usually widen. Figure 3. So this is how, traditionally, this is our prescription for horizontally planing the P3 bone. We simply add length of wall. So now we have a horizontally, in figure 2, we have a horizontally planed hoof capsule with a P3 bone in a medial roll. Excuse me, in a lateral roll. But figure 3, it shows that we have a P3 bone horizontally planed with our hoof capsule in a lateral roll. Kind of confusing. But when we do this stuff, we can predict pathologies. So here's what to look for. If you raise the heel to adjust the plane of the raise the wall, use wall length, or alter the plane of the hoof capsule to alter the plane, to adjust the plane of the P3 bone. Now we can see developing pathologies. They don't have to happen, but we've set these pathologies up to happen. So we're getting a drop with shear to the white line, a drop sole, bone pressing into the sole body, the works. So let's look at a dissected foot now, a dissected sole body. This is a medial lateral view. The first thing we see is the lateral side is wider than the medial side. The next thing we see is a discrepancy in the bar depth. So what does this do to the P3 bone? It can place it in a medial roll. Now there's no absolutes here. You can see unequal depth to the commissure on a radiograph. On a radiograph, you can see equal depth to the commissures, or you can see unequal depth to the commissures. The bone may be in a roll, or it may not be in a roll. So there's other issues. It depends on the plane of the P3 bone, why it's rolling. This has all three problems, so I chose to show it. We see here an increased angle. This horse would have a little straighter wall. Here we see a decreased angle to our arch. And if we look at the angle to our sole edge where the white line attaches to the sole, so this tells us the angle of our wall in this area, so it's a straighter wall. This tells us the angle of our wall on the lateral side, so it's a little lower angle to the wall. Now, when you look at the bottom of the sole, these may be false readings. These are based on the moisture line. Where is the sole falling out? Or how did the farrier trim the sole out? He carved it. You never carve a sole to get what you want. You follow the moisture line. It's best to leave a little more sole in there. If you understand what you're doing, you can get away with a lot more. But the reason why this is a false reading is because the moisture line in this foot may not be aligning with the moisture that's in the excessive sole. So you're reading moisture that's in the excessive sole, but it's a false moisture. That's not hard epidermal sole. So that takes experience to be able to recognize both. If you're in doubt, put the horse out on a hot, dry sand lot for 15 minutes, come back, and you'd probably be cleaning out more of that moist sole till you get to the hard epidermal sole. So now we can put the plane of the P3 bone back on, the toe back onto this sole, and we can now evaluate what we're looking for. Here's our discrepancy in our bar depth. And this is the P3 bone is in a lateral roll. I'm going to show you a little bit more. Look closely. This P3 bone is in a yaw lateral roll and a forward pitch. See how nice it is to have verbiage? So here we're just looking at the caudal portion of the bone. You can see how it's rolling over. And when we remove the bone, we can see the damage to the bone and sole in the toe quarter area. So we have a combination of yaw, pitch, and roll. It's a great way to explain what we're talking about. When I started saying these are terms that are very handy to use because they're recognizable terms when we're working around a central axis. So in reinforcing for the sole arch with an orthotic, that's why I took a few extra minutes to talk about my experience with orthotics. Well, one, we can support body weight. Never try to lift body weight. That's going to bother the horse immensely, and then you're going to have other problems developing, stumbling, tripping. That's another thing orthotics can help with, to prevent those things. But here we've just left the frog pad exposed. Some people like to pack a foot like this. I personally don't because it gets dirt and everything else up into there. This material is better and stronger than the frog itself or that pad. So it can stabilize bone movement. Now, why do we want to stabilize bone movement? Shearing effects. When the more that bone, look at a laminated course. Look how much movement's taking place in a laminated course. It's the last thing you want to see. So you want to stabilize the bone movement as much as you can. And this is going to prevent the sole from overflexing. It'll allow it to flex, but not overflex. Then we have recoil, maintaining bone and tissue placement. This is the best advantage I can say for this product, for an orthotic, is as a flat-footed horse, hates to run, doesn't it? But its sole has lost its recoil. So orthotics can help maintain the bone's elevation in the foot, keep it up. It allows it to drop, unload, but yet it helps it return. Best thing for the horse's foot is recoil. And that's what this product can do. And then we can use it for specific areas for bone adjustment. Now this, I'm debated about putting this into this air talk because it's critical on how we adjust the bone. I get people telling me that you can't change the sole. Well, if the sole can fold and fall down, it definitely under proper control and time. If you're going to just do this one time and say it doesn't work, fine, find another job. because you're not qualified to. It takes, you know what it takes for research? See if I can, two things I really think. You need patience. You need stamina really to endure in research. And you need patience to understand what you're doing. So when we do things to a horse's foot, we have to give it plenty of time to adjust to what you're doing, because all that tissue needs to adjust to what we're doing. But you'll see positive results maybe a year down the road. You'll start to see good positive results. So stay true to your course, and you, as long as you're not causing damage, stay true to your course, and down in a period of time you may see some good changes taking place. You'll see toes y'all come back around to be straighter on that limb. I mean, it's unbelievable the things what trimming to the sole plane can do with a good orthotic. So let's talk about specializing in this area. Well, it's possible to just do the back half of the foot. So why would we do this? A negative plane P3 bone. Whenever you radiograph a foot, before you put this material in and after you put this material in, look at bone elevation between the two radiographs and look at pastern alignment. It all changes. So how can I explain to a veterinarian and a farrier to test this out, to test your work? You have a horse on blocks. You have the foot trimmed as close to the farrier's knowledge as can be to the sole plane. In other words, get the length of wall off. The heels, you need some good understanding of the heel. Heels you always take down slow. And you have to be able to recognize tissue before you can take more heel down till you get to the base. But, so get the foot trimmed as close as you can, get the length of wall off the foot. Put the foot on the block, and while the veterinarian is radiographing the foot, have it on both blocks. While the veterinarian's radiographing the foot, the farrier could be mixing the two-stage putty. After you get your radiograph, pick the foot up, put the putty in the foot, put a paper towel on the foot, and put the foot back down, hopefully as close as it was on the block as it was before, and take a second radiograph. Why the paper towel? It allows the putty won't stick to the platform you're putting it on. Sometimes it'll just come out. Another thing is you want the putty to level to the foot. That's why you give it an escape. It might even be beneficial to walk over and pick the other leg up. If I was doing a horse, I would putty one foot, let it stand on the putty before I put the pad or shoe on, and then I would walk over and pick the other limb up. So that compresses the putty into the foot quite well and takes care of any excess material. And then compare your two radiographs. You're going to see, like the foot we're talking about here, the one with the orthoticing the back half of the foot. Well, you will see an improvement in bone elevation, and you'll see an improvement in pastern alignment. And you don't have to change and the capsule will still be in a horizontal plane. So we're not altering the plane of the hoof capsule to adjust the bone. We're using an orthotic to adjust the bone. The next thing we can do is maybe in the toe area if you have a positive palmar angle. I don't recommend this unless you've got a lot of years experience, because in the heel, the caudal portion, you put putty in there, well, you have a cushion. The bone is cushioned in there, what bone is in that area. But there's no cushion for the toe, the P3 bone. So if you're just going to put something in the toe area, you probably are going to have a little inflammation in the bone if you're not careful. This takes expertise work. So I just mention this because it's possible, but you can get the horse in a lot of trouble. Veer off for a second. A lot of times you can have a fairly sound horse and you put the putty in and then the horse walks off lame. You might think it isn't any good. Well, think of it this way. Farriers are not allowed to diagnose, but that tool, that putty, just diagnosed a sore-footed horse for you. So you just learned how to alter and work around that area until it heals and gets a little bit better. So like I say, it can be used as a diagnostic tool. Or we could just do one side if the bone is in a roll. We could just use the orthotic on one side. But let's talk about a little caution that takes place. Adjusting the P3 bone to protect the P3 from over adjustment. We have to worry about over adjustment. So if we just do this, put putty on each side, we're reinforcing the weak side, right? What could happen? Whenever applying an orthotic, we can over adjust. This is critical to recognize because you can start causing a lot of damage on the other side of the foot if you're not careful. So what you can do is you could either use, this is your call, depending on every situation is different, but it's possible to use the dark green would be a 55 durometer, the light green could be a 33 durometer. Just use a little softer material and put everything in level. And you may just see some nice results taking place. Or if you don't have the 2 durometers, you could use just a little bit less material opposite the side where you see in this picture here. This could actually be a little bit less material than this. This could be level to the horizon or to your pad and your shoe level, but this could be just a little bit less. That's going to counter your over adjustment. So this is just a beginning lecture on how to use orthotics. Again, it affects the whole horse and attitude, everything. It's a game changer for horses, especially when you're orthotic hind feet. They'll take the horse to another level. But you must, here's a sidetrack, I'm probably running a little long. But I've worked on a lot of poor-footed horses in the front end, taken forever for them to change. I learned to just pull the shoes, trim them generally I trim them every day for 4 days, and then the sole, everything, then the trim settles and you don't have anything to do after that. But you come back in a couple weeks and redo it. But if you put an orthotic in hind feet, well, you can shoe it with pads and just work on barefoot front feet. It's amazing how fast they will turn around as long as your trimming is very regular, like every 2 weeks or something. You can turn bad-footed horses around in a very short period of time. And orthotic, the hind feet, really helps them turn around faster. So that's just a little of my experience, just a small amount of the experience I've had with horses, but I hope it'll help. I hope this lecture will help you understand some of the things that our future, orthotics is our future, and this is just a beginning to understand a little bit about some of the uses that we can use it for. So I'd like to thank you all. I hope this is an educational thing, and I hope it doesn't get you in any trouble because you're overusing or using the orthotic improperly. That will get you in trouble. So before you put anything in a horse's foot, study and know exactly everything that it can do to the foot. Thank you again.